Because I know that there are other marketing leaders out there that are listening that, they say, man, I want to get up there as well and kind of show my strengths. For you, where do you feel like that came from?
Um, I think Asset just embodies a culture of if you work hard, you're going to be rewarded for it. And I recognize that right out of the gate that, if I raised my voice, if I stepped into the spotlight, that I'd get the recognition that I needed.
On this episode, I'm speaking with Brent Camp, a VP of Leasing at Asset Living. Brent has worked in the industry for over 14 years across student housing, lease-ups, value-add and repositions, active adult, affordable, and build-to-rent housing. At Asset Living, Brent leads the leasing and marketing initiatives for their conventional portfolio. He drives leasing performance and assists clients in operational leadership in evaluating marketing and sales performance at their communities. He's also a certified apartment manager and a member of the Zillow Rentals Product and Marketing Committee. In his past life, Brent was the co-founder and operator of Oaktopia Music Festival, recognized as Dallas' best festival in 2015 and 2016. When he's not in the office, Brent enjoys golfing, traveling with his wife and dog, and attending concerts. This conversation tapped into a lot of lease-up and marketing leadership insight that was really fun to get into. So let's jump into the conversation. All right, Brent, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you on Transforming Cities.
Yeah, thank you so much for reaching out. Looking forward to it.
Well, I like to always sprinkle in a little bit of upbringings and early experiences to these shows. So I would love if you would give us a brief, sort of synopsis about where you grew up, what your life was like as the youngster version of yourself.
Sure, I'll try to keep it brief. That's difficult for me, but born in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Grew up for about 10 years in Durant, Oklahoma, and then made my way to North Texas, and have kind of been here ever since. Grew up in a small town called Pottsboro, Texas, out on Lake Texoma, and then went to University of North Texas, and kind of planted my roots here in Denton, Texas.
Cool. And one of the things that I recall you telling me is that you actually um, got into apartments while you were at UNT, and it actually was an asset living property then. Is that
It
right?
was. So I moved to UNT, spent my first semester off campus housing, kind of had to lie to UNT that I was commuting because I really didn't want to stay in the dorms. There were all these amazing apartment options around me. So ended up signing a lease at the Ridge at North Texas. Lived there for about 2 weeks, needed to find a job. Saw everyone in the leasing office seemed happy, seemed like that was much better than working retail or being a bar back anywhere else. So applied and fortunately got the job there. And that's kind of how I started my journey in student housing.
Um, I remember when we were planning for this interview and we were talking about your journey to multifamily, and sort of as we move ahead, we'll talk more about leasing as well. But it didn't necessarily start there. It started with a music festival. That's a really cool story, and I want to make sure that you are able to tell that because I think it's a really cool sense of who you are as a person. It's sort of the entrepreneurial spirit that you have as well, and it definitely led into the multifamily industry, however sort of wavy and windy of a road that was. But what was this music festival all about? How did that get started?
So, yeah, how it got started was really funny. I was doing events at the Ridge at North Texas. We ended up trying to do a concert out by our pool. We ended up booking a few bands for it, brought in the production for it. I really got interested in the live events through that, and it worked out well because I was also doing a music internship with the Granada Theater in Lower Greenville in Dallas. And I had been making some connections with different promoters, starting to really learn the ins and outs of that industry and how to really do it at a professional level. So I had a couple of buddies that wanted to do a concert at one of the local bars here in Denton. We started calling around, we started looking for availability, and we just realized that there was one weekend a few months out that every single bar in town was kind of open. So it transitioned from, hey, let's do one concert to let's fill every single one of these venues with all of our friends from UNT that are musicians, and let's see how it goes. So we started booking those venues out. We started getting some attention from some larger kind of regional acts, and we decided let's just go big. So we ended up booking a stage, putting it in downtown Denton, throwing a outdoor and indoor 2-day festival. Um, it was just a couple of scrappy college kids funding it with their own, all of my money was coming from the Ridge. All of my buddies' monies were coming from, their part-time jobs. And it was really cool because we had that event. It went really well. First year, very shoestring budget. I think we had $10,000 total. We got very fortunate that there were some local businesses that were willing to sponsor us in that first year, not knowing what they would receive from it. And it just happened that one of the local business owners in the square, he was at the event, got excited about it, wanted more live events in downtown Denton, and approached us after the festival and wanted to become a business partner. So we were able to scale that event from, a very small 2-day outdoor festival in Denton to what became Dallas's best festival in 2015 and 2016. And the last thing to kind of tie into that is year 4 was probably the biggest year we ever had for the festival. It was a 3-day event. We brought in fashion show activations, comedy show activations. We had music panels. But ahead of all of that, or prior to all of that, we were able to secure Nora Jones as our headliner for that year. And I had a mission from day one that I wanted UNT to be our main stage sponsor at the event. I wanted to kind of tie in my college experience. And the really cool thing about Nora Jones is she actually went to UNT, dropped out after about a year, went out to New York, recorded her famous album, won 9 Grammys, and she had never came back to Denton after that. So we were going to be her first show back in Denton in a decade. And I was able to speak with the dean of students at UNT and kind of let him know what we were doing, what we had cooking. He got really excited about it, and we were able to lock in a UNT partnership for our 4th year, which was really, really cool.
That's incredible. And so that was a journey of, I think you said 4 years, across 4 different years. You were able to kind of ramp this thing up, and then 2015 and 2016 is really, it sounds like it hit its
Yeah, we
stride.
really kind of peaked around there. Year 4 was our biggest, and then we did have a year 5 inception of the festival. Unfortunately, we did lose our partner, our financial partner, after year 4, and we were getting a lot of not kickback from the city, but just a lot of red tape because it was an outdoor event, and we did have to shut down majority of the square for it to happen. So we did move it to Dallas in year 5. It was successful. Unfortunately, our business partner out in Dallas ended up selling his venues to Live Nation, so the event discontinued after year 5. But yeah, 4 years in Denton, and then we moved to Dallas for a year.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really cool. I love that story because it really kind of ties into this next part and your journey into and through multifamily. So you really started with student housing. You were kind of the student housing master. You became someone who was really familiar with it, and you were mentioning to me that there was and there is obviously a cyclical nature to that type of work. And you got to a point where, if I understand correctly, it was just sort of tiring you out. It wasn't something that you wanted to stay in forever, but you didn't necessarily want to leave the industry either. What was that transitionary period like, sort of post college, post festival, kind of like taking these first steps into multifamily?
Yeah, so I spent about 9 years in student housing. And the whole time I was doing that festival, I was still managing communities, was in a director capacity at one point in time, managing student housing communities. And as an industry as a whole, I love it. I mean, it's very exciting. It's, the cyclical nature can be really fun at times, but as I told you in our last conversation, my birthday is in August. I spent 9 years doing turns. Which if you've ever been involved with a turn or know people that were, it's a beast. It's a lot of time. You're basically on the job 45 days in a row, no breaks. So I wanted to celebrate my birthday again after about 9 years of missing it. I know my wife was really upset that I never really got to celebrate. So yeah, I started looking for different avenues within the apartment industry that I could explore outside of student, and multifamily always caught my eye. It was stable. It was, always developing. There was new product coming on, every single block around me, and I wanted to be a part of it. So the last student property I was on was a deal called Northside UTD, 2,500 units. That may have been the turn that broke me. We had 18 days to turn 1,200 plus bedrooms. So that was a little bit of a nightmare, but it was a successful turn, successful lease up. And after I finished that up, I started looking for different opportunities. Ended up applying for a couple multifamily jobs. Couldn't really even get an interview, even though I had 9 years of experience in student, on site, and in corporate roles. No one really wanted to talk to me because there is such a variance between what we do in multifamily and what they did in student. And I got lucky. We talked about luck being a big part of my career journey here, but the hiring manager at one of the jobs that I applied for looked at my resume, and it was an active adult community. And she was looking for someone with senior experience, and she had misread my resume from student experience. She thought it meant senior experience. So ended up landing the interview through, a major stroke of luck. Once I was able to get in and really explain who I was and what I was wanting to do, the dynamic shift, and they started to listen a little bit. So ended up getting a lease up property in Plano, Texas. It was my first venture into multifamily, also into active adult, which was probably the best transition possible for me, because active adult is so similar to student. It's all about the engagement. It's all about the events. A lot of them don't have jobs, so they hang around the office like the students did in student housing. So it was a really good transition for me.
And I think that's the time where you really started joining up with what you would consider to be the marketing team. And after that, I know that you transitioned fairly quickly into a regional marketing director role. And this to me is when it starts to tie back to sort of the hustle that you had with the music festival. And so I think you mentioned something about Pokemon cards to me too. Like, tell me a little bit about that. You come from student, you go to multifamily, you're on the marketing team, and then you're fairly quickly moving up the ranks of the marketing team there. What was that time like? How did that really start to plug into your strengths as an individual?
Yeah, so on the Pokemon cards, growing up, I always had a knack for sales, and I always had a passion for promotions, and that tied into what I was doing in the music industry. I am not a musician. I couldn't carry a tune if I wanted to, but I'm a natural born promoter, and I'm very passionate about the things that I enjoy, and I'll be a very loud advocate for the things that I'm passionate about. So, jumping into the multifamily role, like I said, did that lease up in Plano. I had always kind of had a vision of going into a marketing capacity role at some point in my career, but my proficiencies were in operations. That's what was on my resume. That's what, people really wanted me to fill for their organization, was to be in an operational capacity. And again, got very lucky. When I was at that lease up, at the time we were Alpha Barnes, which was one of Asset's first partnerships when we started acquiring other platforms over the last few years, and became close with my regional marketing supervisor at the time. When we were selling the property, I wanted to continue on my journey with Asset. I didn't want to stay with that community. I didn't want to stay with the management company that they were bringing in. I wanted to continue on with Asset. So just really put a bug in her ear and was like, hey, that team is small. And I understand, because multifamily is small, but I think there's a place for me there. There's a home for me there. And, she was a really big advocate with leadership at Asset to get me an interview. She definitely highlighted a lot of my strengths on site as it related to event activation and different marketing campaigns that we did, and said, hey, we just need to give this guy a shot. Transitioned over to the marketing team with Asset. At the time, I think we were right around probably 60,000 units. It was a team of 5, and fast forward 2 years, we're now sitting at 285,000 units, and our marketing team has grown to a team of 35 just in the last 2 years.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Transforming Cities, brought to you by Authentic, delivering premier multifamily brand experiences and smart digital marketing. Authentic's proven approach accelerates leasing velocity, boosts rental rates, and increases long-term value. You can find out more at AuthenticFF.com. And by Charles Gate, the multifamily investor's secret weapon to help underwrite, go to market, and operate projects that generate market-beating returns. With an adaptive staffing model and on-demand leasing teams, CharlesGate empowers a better resident experience at an efficient cost structure for today's owners. Visit charlesgate.com for more. You ended up moving up the ranks pretty quickly over the last few years. So you were at the regional level, and then you fairly quickly also transitioned to VP of Leasing. And this was, I think, in about 2 years or so, maybe a little bit under 2 years. Despite being in a culture where maybe traditionally at the corporate level, you're talking 3, 4, 5 years at each level as you're sort of working your way up. Um, where did the advocacy come for you moving up the ranks, or where did the hustle come in that allowed you to move up the ranks? What do you think that was for you? Because I know that there are other marketing leaders out there that are listening that, they say, man, I want to get up there as well and kind of show my strengths. For you, where do you feel like that came from?
Um, you know, I think Asset just embodies a culture of if you work hard, you're going to be rewarded for it. And I recognize that right out of the gate that, if I raised my voice, if I stepped into the spotlight, that I'd get the recognition that I needed. And yeah, so I started in that regional marketing supervisor role. I was in that role for about 6 months. And then, again, it just kind of it was lucky that we were growing the way we were at the time, and we were expanding the team. We needed more people to lead, and I had just been kind of building myself up for that position. So one of the things when I came over to the multifamily side, we had a lot of Class A product, we had a lot of luxury product, and that's where our regional marketing supervisors were really kind of allocated. And then when we started to expand and started looking into the affordable vertical and started looking into build to rent, we didn't have a lot of experience in those verticals on our team. And, candidly, I didn't have any experience in those verticals, but I made the jump from student to active adult, and, it was pretty seamless. And I learned a lot of lessons along the way and thought, I'll take on the build to rent. I'll take on, some of this vintage
Mm,
product and these rehab products, and we'll see what we can do with them. And, fortunately, I was very successful in a lot of the goals we set out for those communities. And again, Asset has a culture of breeding really great talent and recognizing that talent. And with every successful lease up and every successful goal that I was able to accomplish, it just put me further and further into that spotlight. And then when the opportunity came around for a director position, I was rewarded that position. So then fast forward another 6 to 9 months, the team continued to grow. We continued to get more partnerships through different acquisitions, and we needed to kind of scale our team into a hub and spoke centralized model. We needed to grow out of the central region into the southeast, into the mountain region. So I helped build some of those systems and some of the centralized processes during my time as a director, which put me in a position to be in that VP position.
Let's pull back the lens for listeners about asset living just in general, just for context. So you mentioned earlier 285,000 units managed, almost 300 almost 300,000 at this point, which is pretty incredible. Almost 40 years in the industry, just under 10,000 employees, 40 across 40 states, more than 40 states actually, I believe. Pretty incredible, massive organization, continuously growing. Um, and one of the things that I noticed about the company culture, certainly it's in the messaging, it's on the website. I see it in social posts all the time, but there is this tendency to really show forward this community building aspect, this culture, this positivity, really this idea of building great, vibrant communities and then retaining residents at those communities and then retaining talent on the team. And I've wondered, given the size of the organization, how do you even approach the idea of building these vibrant communities after, let's say, that initial lease up phase has wrapped up? It's one thing to have a lot of excitement and energy into the lease up phase and getting to stabilization, but with asset being the size it is, how do you, as one of the leasing and marketing leaders, keep that energy moving forward beyond those initial time periods?
So we do a lot of the same things now that we did when we were an outfit of 40,000 units. We recently had a town hall where our president, Ryan McGrath, was really promoting the messaging of being brilliant with the basics. And I think that's what we do best within our organization. When it comes to a lease up, being brilliant with those basics after we go through the transition of that cycle, and continuing with the community engagement, continuing with the feedback mechanisms. It's so important to be collecting feedback from our residents and our services that we're offering them, and then using that feedback. I really think that's where a lot of organizations fail, is they do a good job collecting the feedback, but then they don't do anything with the information. So continuing to have that continuity of services, from the day that they sign their lease to the day that they renew their lease, and hopefully the next year they do the same. Um, but that's really what I think drives us, and really makes us successful, is that we don't lose sight of the basics, and that's really what makes, whether
Yeah.
it's a Class A community, a new lease up, an affordable community, being brilliant with those basics, and just understanding the fundamental elements of communicating with your residents, engaging with your residents. What makes a community? It's people engaging with one
Yeah.
another. It's people communicating with one another. So fostering that within each one of our communities is very, very important.
We think very similarly on this because I know we talked about activating a property well before it opens, and I think you mentioned to me that there are times when you're actually at the site 6 to 12 months before it even opens to kind of get familiar with it, get things rolling. How important do you find it to be to really start that activation and nurturing early and often, as compared to waiting until the ninth inning, bottom of the ninth inning, just before it gets rolling out to the public? Do you see a big difference there? Is that part of the playbook that asset runs at this point as well?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to lease ups, we get on the ground as soon as we can. There's when we start our clock is something that we can dictate. We can't dictate the construction schedules. There's always going to be delays. It's inevitable. But we can control how early we get started. And, if you're doing it with your podcast, you're doing it with Authentic. If you've ever built a brand, it takes a while, especially if you're looking to do it holistically and organically. And it takes a while to really gain that trust within a community. And, it's not just turning on ads and setting up ads on listing networks. You really have to get integrated with your local community, whether that's through the Chamber of Commerce, whether that's through outreach marketing. But yeah, it takes a while to build a brand. So the sooner we can get
Mm.
started, the better. And we do typically like to get involved as soon as possible. Sometimes that is, you know, sometimes we get PMA signed and we got to get started next week and the property's opening in 2 weeks. But sometimes we do have the privilege of getting started a year in advance. And we really do see the fruits of our labor when we do that, because by the time we open our doors, we are an established member of that community.
You said something to me that that feels like a really sticky quote, and you said you need to start sooner to give it time to settle. And I thought that that was really appropriate for the work that we're in and the industry that we're in. Is you can't, to your point, you can't just go to a building, open it up, and say, "Hey, everyone, come in here, get the leases signed." There's definitely a ramp up period that I think that needs to take place for the community to get to know you, future residents to get to understand the culture, the offerings, the kind of the whole mix of it all. And it seems like it's not necessarily commonplace yet across the industry to have this idea of start sooner, give it time to settle, and find success at the end of that. I think there's a lot of rushing that happens fairly consistently, and it's nice to hear someone at an organization that is so large that is seeing the positive that comes from starting early and giving it time to settle.
Our team has a lot of student overlap. So, majority of my marketing team has some level of experience in student, and that's something that we learned early on in student, is the importance of building a brand. To your point, you can open up a storefront, you can open up an apartment complex, and you can start trying to collect business that way. But building a brand takes time, and it takes a lot of nurturing, the same way that the prospect life cycle days, it used to be you'd put some bandit signs out in front of your community, people would drive in, people would take a tour. But the average prospect journey is now typically 31 days plus. So we look at that in the way that we set up our branding the same way. We need time to build it, we need it to be organic, it can't be something that's bought and paid for. um, you know your brand is very much who you are within the community, and people can tell when it's authentic or it's not authentic.
Let's transition to the challenges of being a third party manager across a bunch of different asset types. I know that you can speak to this. You started in student, but asset also works in multifamily, affordable, built to rent, etc. One of the questions I had for you early on was: is there a playbook? Is there like an asset playbook that you run and you say, all right, new property, launch the playbook, get the Google Docs copied over, get everything printed off for the team, and we're rolling? Or is there a nuance, vertical to vertical? How would you respond to that? How do you answer that? And what's the asset
A
approach?
little bit of both. So it's kind of like cooking. Baking is very much a science, and cooking is very much a field. And we have to take that approach when we're looking at every new community that we're onboarding. So yeah, we do have a playbook. You have to have systems in place. You have to make sure projects are being tracked, goals are being met. Um, but we do treat every single community a little bit differently. What is going to make the biggest impact within that specific community, within that specific product type? So, yes, we definitely do have to have a playbook, being as large of an organization as we are, and the different verticals that we explore. Um, but to my point with cooking, it very much is field. So when we get into a community, we have to figure out what are the unique selling points, or what makes this community differentiate from our neighbors down the street. Um, and the playbook doesn't always work when you're trying to fill that out and you're trying to do that research. So um, yes, both the playbook, and then we absolutely have to have some nuance and treat each property as a new individual project, because they are going to be a little bit different. When you're doing an affordable deal versus doing a student deal, or doing build to rent versus doing high rise communities, you're gonna approach it a little bit differently. But back to the fundamentals, those are always going to stay the same: continuity and services, communication, resident engagement. We're going to do that at every single one of these.
How important has it been for Asset to lean on partnerships, or maybe said another way, new partners that come in through acquisitions that you've made to bring in, let's call it new knowledge or refined knowledge in a particular industry vertical? Do you lean on that a lot, or do you find that the playbooks and systems that you have in place generally are kind of what you move forward with?
Every new partnership that we get brings new knowledge to our team, which that's the most exciting part of the last 2 years through these partnerships. For instance, I was with Alpha Barnes when that acquisition took place, and Hugh Cobb, who is the president of Alpha Barnes, now one of our principals, he is the affordable guru. I mean, everybody in Texas knows his name. Everybody knows he understands that vertical more than anybody else, and he was able to bring a lot of value into our team, not only through his experience, but through his team's experience. Our compliance department uh, was completely bolstered when we were able to bring in that team that had that dedicated, affordable experience for decades. Again, it was something that we as an organization didn't have a lot of experience with. So, yeah, every single platform acquisition that we've had and every new partnership that we've gotten, we have seen, so many benefits from not only bringing in these incredible groups of talent, but to your point, adopting some of the systems that they use. We when it was just kind of our central team, our Texas offices, Houston and Dallas, we had a very uniform approach to our marketing stack, our software stack. And then as we started to integrate with our other divisional offices, we realized, hey, there's a lot of benefit to using this platform, or there's a lot of benefit to coupling these two platforms together. Um, so yeah, it's never us coming in telling them what to do. It's always us coming in and learning something new.
I want to go back to something you mentioned a few minutes ago, and it sounded like you were a pretty big part of establishing this across the asset marketing teams. But you mentioned the phrase hub and spoke, and I want to better understand from you what that model looks like and how it supports the sort of greater marketing team as people come and go, as people are on vacation and maternity leave or whatever the situation might be. I've heard of the pod model before, definitely explored that a bit with our team. How do you define, or how would you share what the kind of hub and spoke model is for asset?
So what we've kind of established is, to your point, we we don't want anything within our marketing platform to operate in silos, because there's inefficiencies with that. So, if someone does go on maternity leave and they are the direct contact for 15 communities, what do those 15 communities do over the next 2 months? So, what we did is we kind of broke our team out into three different domains. We have a domain of creative and branding that our director of marketing support, Amber Spitzenberger, runs. And again, they handle all of our creative, all of our design, all of our branding, social and reputation elements of what we do. And then we also have our digital marketing and transition team, which is our vice president of marketing, Tiffany Blau, oversees that. And then my team is kind of the localized support for each one of our regions. So we built a project management software that we use. That way, when properties that might not have dedicated marketing support through one of my marketing managers, they still have the support of the centralized team. And again, continuity of services. Things don't slow down when someone has to take a break, which has been really great because some of the other partnership platforms that we've acquired over the last few years, they were running a very siloed operation. If the marketing director did go on vacation for a week, that website's not getting updated. Those campaign activations aren't getting pushed through. And we just had to identify a way to scale. That way, business never slowed down. We just have too many moving pieces at any moment, for there to be such an inefficiency of things being bottlenecked by one person or one particular.
I love that. I think that's a great principle. I think even for teams small and large, I think the idea of organizing in a way that if one person leaves, the entire pyramid doesn't come toppling down. I mean, it seems like it's a paramount for success these days. I want to kind of keep moving forward with insights from you while I have time to bend your ear here. And then, like I said, I think there are others listening that are either leasing professionals or marketing professionals who want to kind of understand how you approach things. And so one of the other big topics I wanted to bring up was, for us, we see a big disconnect between early on-site activation, renter nurturing, and the lease up phase at properties of all sizes. And I would say in your domains, probably all asset types. So as a VP of leasing, I'm curious if you could provide a few tips, maybe tricks that you have up your sleeve there. Maybe there's a Pokemon card under there somewhere. Um, what would you say to other leasing professionals who want a successful run up to a great leasing season, or maybe a great renewal season? What would you
I
say?
mean, again, I don't want to continue to repeat myself on being brilliant with the basics, but I really think that's the most important part because I've seen, again, regardless of asset type, regardless of location, when you are an excellent communicator to your residents, to your prospects, when you are a good steward to your community, when you're a good advocate for your community is going to. Yes, there's a lot of things you can do to drive lead generation at a community. There's a lot of things you can do to create efficiencies, but really understanding the nature of this business and how important what we do is to people. I mean, this is arguably the largest purchase that people are going to make this year is when they're finding their home. It's a very emotional thing for a lot of people. People are emotionally attached to their homes. I get it. And we have to be good stewards to that. We have to be advocates for that. We have to listen to them and we have to, however we can build on their quality of life at their community, we need to be constantly seeking that out. So without, getting too much into the weeds, I really think the fundamentals never need to be skipped. As far as lead generation goes, it's very supportive of that. As far as resident retention goes, um, it's paramount to anything else. You can have all the flashy amenities that you want. You can do the most incredible marketing campaigns that you can think of, but if your residents aren't happy, they're not going to stay at your community.
As we start to wrap up here, I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into your recommendations for professionals who want to move up the ranks, do better work, show up better for their teams. And I think it dovetails nicely into what you were just saying there with the basics. I mean, the basics can't be skipped. So whether that's a checklist or certain things to implement with their teams, um, is there a recommendation or a list of recommendations or some nuance when overseeing, multiple lease ups versus one lease up for the professional that's out there who is who's in it, they're in the weeds, they're in the muck. There's wins, there's losses, whether it's with a small team or a large team. What suggestions would you give them? Maybe peace of mind, or um, just thoughts from someone who is at the level that you are today.
Yeah. So when you're, running contact, you're the point of contact for multiple communities, and you have multiple, irons in the fire. Staying organized is critical, but also understanding how to delegate, understanding where your proficiencies are, what you can excel at. Again, back to our centralized model. I am not a website guru. I am not a designer, and I'm going to defer to the experts within my team for those items. So I think understanding the strengths of your team and where the efficiencies lie is very important. Um, you know, you're going to have wins and losses. That's inevitable. And learning from those losses and not letting them be setbacks is very important. That's something I constantly preach to my team is being in marketing, being in the industry that we are, we cannot be afraid of failure. Failure is inevitable. And it's the perspective of how you look at that failure is how you're going to move forward. And if you allow it to hold you back, if you allow it to make you feel insecure, then that's the results of your labor. But if you learn lessons from it, if you realize that it's just part of taking risk, then I think you're going to be exceptional at what you're doing. And that's a big one too. I think a lot of people are risk adverse and they're not willing to take risk because they're afraid of the repercussions. What if this doesn't work out? If you're not taking risk, you're never going to excel. You're never going to be where you want to be because you're playing it too safe. And I will say, I think people that play it too safe often are not the ones that are being elevated through roles.
Yeah, you I wrote a note in front of me here that said, maybe not, you might need to be a little bit dangerous, but definitely not afraid of failure. Even if you're fired, even if you're making mistakes, you have to be okay failing fast, making a pivot, learning from your mistakes. And that, I think that rings true on all levels of the work that we both do. And I think that's great advice for someone working their way up through the multifamily industry. So thank you for sharing that. Before we wrap up, I want to hit you with a couple of rapid fire questions. The first being, what would you say is the most exciting, fun, cool project you've been involved with recently, and why?
So I would say, as of the last couple of weeks, probably our biggest announcement of the last year, we just recently partnered with First Communities out of Atlanta. It's our largest partnership to date, 50,000 units coming on board to asset. Um,
Wow.
and that's been really exciting for me and my team because they had a very similar structure for their marketing team. So they also had kind of a hub and spoke model built out. They had a centralized platform to support all of their assets, and getting to learn from them and getting to see kind of how what their challenges are, what they're dealing with, and recognizing that, oh, these are the same challenges we're dealing with. Let's find a way to work through them. But I think having that large expansion on our team is probably the most exciting thing recently. Lots of new faces, lots of new ideas, and lots of new communities to create success with.
All right, this is the $1 million question always. But one book that you would recommend right now would be what and why? Why the recommendation?
Funny you ask it. I have it on my desk. Maybe you sent over some notes.
Ex-
But we're talking
Excellent.
about taking risk, and it's a book called Loom Shots by Safi Bakal. Um, the book is about nurturing crazy ideas. Example of that: sonar was invented way before World War II. It was kind of a discredited idea for a long time, and it was actually one of the reasons we won the war. German U-boats were actually right outside of New York City at one point during World War II, and if it wasn't for sonar, they may have made some ground into the U.S. So it's a book about nurturing crazy ideas, understanding that sometimes your gut instinct on something isn't the reality. Maybe we need to look into this. Maybe we need to nurture this, and maybe we're going to see something groundbreaking with it. So I would recommend this book to anybody that is maybe a little risk adverse, that maybe is a little willing or unwilling to raise their voice, because it's
That's a great recommendation. We will be sure to add that into the show notes for this episode. So if you want to check out Loon Shots, we'll get that in there as well. Brent, it's been great to have you on. There's only one more thing to do here, and that is to roll out the figurative red carpet for you. Tell us what you're up to, where we can find you online, people could follow up with you and send you DMs.
You can find me online pretty much on LinkedIn. I'm the most inactive social media user on our marketing team, so deactivated everywhere else. But you can find me on LinkedIn, Brent Camp. You can find me on our asset living page on LinkedIn as well. And then check out our new website that just rolled out 2 weeks ago, assetliving.com. Our website team has been working diligently the last few months to get this set up, and it kind of shows kind of how we've come full circle the last year. So
It was a great job. Well, Brent, great to chat with you. Great to meet you and get to know you over the last few weeks. I'm excited for this one to go out, and for all the listeners, thanks for listening along. Definitely reach out to Brent with any questions. Thanks again for your time.
Chris, thanks for having me.